So I didn't realize until I was about 10 years old that my great-grandmother had been pimping me out for years. And there wasn't, by the time I was 10, I had been turning tricks with women for a long time. But it wasn't particularly special except for Bess Carroll. Now, Bess Carroll was my great-grandmother's best friend, my great-grandmother Katie. And they lived next door to each other with a large vacant lot in between, and no amount of grass or trees in between their two houses could keep these two women apart. They even actually had rockers and windows so they could look across the vacant lot to see each other. They were each other's maid of honors at their weddings. They raised their kids together, and they buried their husbands together. If you want a visual of these two women, Bess Carroll sort of looked like Mrs. Beasley, who was the doll on Family Affair, which is a show from the 70s. I'm only speaking to the older crowd. And my great-grandmother Katie sort of looked like Santa Claus's wife. Yeah. So Katie lived in a duplex with my Nana and Grandpa on the other side. And this was done on purpose because Nana wanted to sort of make sure that her mother could stay independent as long as possible. But I just want to keep an eye on her. And so she was next door. And I was fortunate enough to have a bedroom on both sides of the duplex. And when I was pretty young, I found a secret passageway in the attic that went from one side to the other, which came in incredibly handy depending on who was having what for dinner, who was watching what on TV, and who would let me stay up the latest, which was usually Katie. Now, my father, very Irish father, a very Irish man, had his challenges with alcohol and anger. It's a very popular Irish cocktail. Maybe some of you know some of those people. That combination is really quite incredible. And so I actually liked having a place where I could sort of disappear to when I needed to. And coincidentally, his father had a similar problem with the drink, as they say in Ireland. And so this two-state solution of a bed on each side worked incredibly well for me. So when I was about 8, Katie decided to teach me how to play canasta so that I could be the fourth at the card table with Bess Carroll and Margaret O'Brien. And Katie didn't really like Margaret O'Brien very much. And she was so sweet, but she would never really say that. But, you know, when Margaret was losing at cards, Katie would sort of sit a little straighter, and she sort of talked a lot and had a lilt in her voice. And when she laughed, she kind of tossed her head back a little bit, and there was a lot of winking that went on. So I could tell that she didn't really like Mrs. O'Brien very much. But Mrs. O'Brien didn't like me very much. She sort of felt like there was something odd about a child who was hanging out with 80-year-old women. And she also sort of thought I was too young to be playing cards. Actually, I think it was her issues were because she didn't have kids and she didn't know what to do with them. But this only spurred Katie on further to turn me into the card shark that she wanted me to be. And I have to say, even at 8, I took some sick delight, embarrassing to say, that I would just like beat her and like stick it to her and love it, even at 8 years old, beating Mrs. O'Brien at her own game. Well, you can imagine that I really liked actually spending time at Nana's and at Katie's. But there was one particular sound that if I'm very, very quiet, I can still hear almost perfectly all these years later. And it was rap, rap, rap. And Katie would take her shillelagh. For you non-Irish people, that is a crooked Irish cane with a big knob on the end. And she would hit the wall, and that was a signal to me that a card game was about to begin. So I would scurry upstairs, cross over through the secret passageway in the attic. I would come down the other side. By that time, Katie would be in the kitchen making tea, setting out the tray and getting the cups and saucers out. And she would say, quick, Bess and Margaret are on their way. So I would go set up the card table, the chairs. I would go to the bottom drawer of the curio and take out the decks of cards. I would get a dish and I would fill it with pink Canada mints for Bess Carroll, and Werther's butterscotch for Mrs. O'Brien. And then I would go in the kitchen and get a plate and open up the big blue tin of Danish butter cookies and take a stack of those and put them next to Katie's chair. And it was so amazing to have someone this different than me be so excited and enthusiastic to be my teammate. Like I loved that. Well, as I got older, Katie got more demented. And she wasn't like a nice demented person. You know, some people go that way, some people don't. So she actually kind of got a little cray-cray in the negative kind of way. And she would secretly tell me that Nana was beating her, which I actually found kind of amusing because usually it was Katie who was beating Nana. What would happen is that there was a certain perimeter around Katie's chair in the living room, and if Nana got too close, Katie would grab her shillelagh and just clock Nana on the head with it. And whenever she did that, I always laughed because I sort of thought, all right, well, two things. One, it's kind of funny to see like an 88-year-old woman hit a 62-year-old woman. You know, I mean, that maybe sounds perverted, but it just seems like funny to me as a kid. But then also I sort of thought, Nana, you act all the time like this never happens, and this happens like 2 to 3 times a day. 2 to 3 times a day. You know, back then there were no options really for caregivers. You know, so Nana was the nurse and the friend and the daughter and the respite and the cook and the cleaner and the palliative care team. She kind of did it all. You know, and I sort of think where we are now culturally, I sort of think like had Nana had the opportunity to just sort of be with her mother and love her mother and not have to learn the complete ninja moves to avoid the cane hitting her in the head several times a day, that it would have been a better story. You know, multi-generational living has changed a lot over the years. You know, the idea of family living together with all their strengths and weaknesses, and somehow they're all supposed to kind of work together and offset each other, and it's all supposed to work out pretty good. Well, Nana and Katie and I actually had that. You know, we sort of kind of knew how to be there for each other, and each person brought a little value to the relationship. When Katie died, I was quite sad to lose my playmate, my friend. And Bess Carroll eventually stopped playing cards with me because she said it was too sad to look at me, and because she said I can only see your great-grandmother in your face, which I didn't really understand at the time. But several years later, my Nana died, and it was then that I realized that joy has a constant companion, and her name is sorrow. And you really don't get one ever without the other. Thanks.